My name is Phil Goodwin. I'm an E-flat bass player and also conductor here when our professional conductor isn't around. And I joined the band in 1985 and I'm currently the longest serving player. I think music is extremely important. It's been a major part of my life since I was growing up. Very strangely, I didn't come from a musical background. Neither of my parents played. And I started to play recorder. And gradually, when I went to primary school, got to violin. And then one day I heard a senior school came over with a brass band, and I thought I want to be part of that. And so eventually when I went to the senior school, I auditioned and got in the band. I was given a tuba, which disappointed my family and neighbours. And it really went from there, and I don't know how that came about. And I started playing. I come from the Potteries, and it was not a brass band area. At that time, there probably was only one brass band that was known as the Royal Doulton Band. I never played for Royal Doulton Band. They did disband and reformed slightly again, but I never played with them. I played in my school band, which was conducted by a chap called Stuart Johnson, who was a really big influence on me, and of course for a lot of youth bands and school bands. He was one of the first guys, I think, really writing music specifically for school bands that were interesting to play, but also parts of exercise to improve players. He then persuaded me to start playing in the local orchestra, the local symphony orchestra, which I did. He then also, at the same time, suggested I audition for the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, and I got in, surprisingly for me. And it was really from that I started to think about music. It was already playing a huge part of my life in terms of rehearsals. There weren't any other tuba players around in Staffordshire at that time, and so I was getting, although I was still only 13, 14, I was still doing a lot of work. I was playing a youth orchestra as well as a symphony orchestra. There was an evening class at the local technical college, and Stuart was involved in that and had a brass band of sorts. Again, I played in that. And then I got to sixth form and was still unsure of what I was going to do. I had no intentions at that point of going to music college, but on one of the concerts with the symphony orchestra, the bass trombone player of the Halley at that time, Nev Roberts, came along and he got chatting to me and said, what was I going to do? And he said, you make a decent sound, you ought to come to Manchester and see my mate Stuart. Stuart Robert was a tuba player of the Halley. And I then had this mad idea that I'd audition for music college. And I auditioned at the Royal Manchester College, and I also applied to the Royal Academy. I had my audition I think Monday or Tuesday at the Royal Manchester, and they told me there and then I was accepted. So I phoned the Royal Academy and never went for the audition. I just went straight to Manchester. And so from there, really, that was when it really took off. And when I moved to Manchester, a friend of mine from Stoke knew the bandmaster at the CWS Manchester Band, and he'd written to him and said that I was coming to Manchester, and so if they were on the lookout for a player, maybe get in touch. I did get a call from the Co-op band, and Derek Garside, as it was at that time, was the principal cornet, and he invited me along to audition. And I've said many times before, it was the worst 2 hours of my life at that point. I didn't know anything about bands in the sense of sections or what have you. I played in the school band, National Youth Brass Band. And he was throwing pieces in front of me that I'd never seen. It was standard repertoire, I guess. But it was very uncomfortable. End of the audition, he said, well, you're not really good enough. But they've taken you on at college, so they must think they can teach you something, so we'll take a chance. And I joined the Co-op then in 1972, and back in 71, early 72. And I stayed there until I moved here. Sadly, the CWS band isn't no more. The sponsorship was removed, But I did find that a real interesting time, a real eye-opener for me. The conductor at that time was Alex Mortimer, part of the great Mortimer dynasty, of course. Alex was a phenomenal character, great musician, but probably one of the real last old-fashioned directors of music of a top section band, and he ran it with an iron fist. It was really very disciplined, but again, I think he had a bit of a soft spot because he was himself as a euphonium and tuba player, and he played at the Halley at times. And obviously, I went in and I did play with the Halley many times, and so he, I think, took a little bit of a soft spot. Always used to call me Mr. Tuba because I turned up with one of the very first wide bell E-flat basses, and so that was again a very interesting time. But again, real eye-opener because of the repertoire. I just didn't know anything, and that's really how I started to become involved in brass bands more, almost more than orchestras. The orchestral side, obviously I was at college studying to be an orchestral player. I enjoyed all of that, and I've played professionally, doing lots of, say, Halley, BBC and so on, Welsh opera. But bands have always been a constant, because as a freelance tuba player, it's a bit hit and miss, and you can get lots of good work, but then of course once you get around Christmas it's all messiahs and so on, and there's no work for tubas. And so it was good that, you know, the band was always something constant. And I remember when I went to music college, Stuart Roebuck, my teacher there, said, I told him I was playing in a band, and there was always, I think, a little bit of snobbishness from a lot of orchestral players regarding brass bands. I mean, we all know in actual fact that when we get down to it, that isn't the case. With the brass players, particularly a lot of the major orchestras now, I've got a real brass band background. And so he said to me that provided he felt that the band wasn't affecting my playing, I could play with the band. He said, but the moment he felt that for whatever reason it was getting in the way, it was affecting the sound I made or whatever, then I would have to stop. But he never stopped me. And so from there, I played with a serious band, all the way through until the company took away the sponsorship and the band folded. We tried to keep that band going. It reformed as a City of Manchester band. And that was sort of 84, 85. And that was a very, very tough period. We lost players. Derek Garside was still conducting the band. He'd come back. But we had no band room. We had no instruments. And we eventually got some sponsorship from the Manchester City Council. And we were promised a new band room, which the band did eventually move into. I didn't actually see that. We'd always rehearsed within the council buildings, the town hall, and so on. But it was a very tough period. And I guess at that point, I was sort of conductor, treasurer, secretary, an occasional player, and I guess I wasn't really enjoying my playing very much. And right out of the blue, I got a call from Dyke to say, could I do a concert with them? And that was early in 85. I went along and I totally and utterly enjoyed it. It really reinvigorated me. And they booked me for another job later that year, in July that year, and I thought, oh yeah, I could do that, I'll be all right. And then in the meantime, I got another call and asked me to do another job, and then would I consider joining the band. And that was a big tough decision because I've been doing a lot of orchestral playing. I had actually been asked to join the band in 1976, or at least to come along, and I didn't come. 76 was a busy year. I was just finishing college. I was doing a lot of orchestral playing, and I was also guested with Corey Band on their bicentennial tour of America. And so at that time, Dyke didn't seem to, fit into the picture for me. And anyway, when I got the call again in 85, I had a chat with the wife and said, what do you think? And she said, well, it's take them 9 years to ask you from the first time, you better say yes. And so I I literally came with the idea of doing a year. And I wanted, because of what had gone on at the co-op, I really wanted to just come along and enjoy my playing. I was determined not to get involved in anything, but I was going to come along and play, and then I was going to go home. And that was 31 years ago. So I don't quite know what happened in the middle of that. And so, yeah, going back to the question about how important the music, from then I'd been doing some freelance teaching, and then one of the schools, grammar school in Manchester, asked me to do some classroom teaching, and I did that, and eventually I became head of music, and I was in that school in total for about 36 years. And so the music was a pretty important part of aspect, and it still is, because not only here, but I'm involved in conducting elsewhere. I've conducted my village band at Delph since 1980, and various other bands, and also lots of youth projects and so on. So the music has definitely taken over from those very early days where, and the sort of growing up in Stoke, I never thought that I'd be doing what I was doing now. I think for the early years, there are two people who stand out. One in particular is Geoffrey Brand. I mentioned earlier, I managed to get into the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain. That was a huge turning point for me, because all of a sudden I heard players of standard I didn't know existed. But Geoffrey was the music director then of the youth band, a very influential person. I found him a fabulous conductor. I liked the way he approached music, his enthusiasm, and the way in which he described music is something I still use today. He used to like to tell stories and invent things. I do the same, and I have to attribute that to Geoffrey completely. And also, he, on one of the courses, wanted volunteers to conduct. And for some strange reason I've never really fully understood, I volunteered. And I remember that working with him on certain pieces, and then we got to conduct the National Youth Brass Band in rehearsal, and I think we did Carmen Fantasy, not Carmen Fantasy, Carmen Suite then, Dennis Wright. And so for me there's a real symmetry with that as well, because obviously Geoffrey was with the National Youth Band then, but also at Black Dyke. And for me to be at the National Youth Band, and then also to come through as a council member and trustee now of the National Youth Band, of which Geoffrey is, and also to be here at Black Dyke playing, and also, as I say, getting the chance to conduct the band. It really is a big full circle. And I think I put that very much down to Geoffrey's influence at the beginning. Also, in those early days then, Alex Mortimer, because of the pedigree of the guy and his history in the family, of course, and later obviously working with Harry Mortimer. But I think that Alex, in those formative years for me, just setting out in brass bands, the way in which he approached music particularly was a big influence for me. Whatever, whether it be in a job or whether in bands we're talking about obviously here, is there always going to be issues that come along. I would always want, and when I leave the band, I will always remember the good times, because there's more good times than bad. But yes, there has been some challenges over the years, and that's not always from within the band. Sometimes there have been challenges from outside. There were periods when we've had, when we lost a sponsor from John Foster, when that changed. That altered the dynamic here quite a lot. There's been challenges upon the band in terms of when the band particularly decided they no longer wanted to work with the current, at that time, musical director. That creates issues. We had issues when the conductor might decide to, he doesn't want particular players in the band, and other players have taken exception to that. And you lose friends, and you wonder how the band is at times going to survive. And I think one of the biggest challenges we had here that is always that well documented that after John Foster's sponsorship, that we were very close to losing this band room. And I think we, because of the nature that John Foster, apart from the mill, he owned lots of other plots of land. And for people at that time were trying to sort out the finances of the mill, then obviously one of the areas that they could recoup money was on the land. And this band room was a very prime target for that. And I think unless we'd have had that consortium that came together as a group of trustees and the stepping in of Bradford and Bingley, I don't think we would have had this band room at this time. And that's something that seems unbelievable. But that was a real challenging time for the band. And I think the other thing that people tend to forget is that all those periods where there aren't any sponsorship, you have to go out and work. And we were working very hard. We were doing lots and lots of concerts, up to 60 or more concerts a year. And that in itself creates a lot of challenges, not only physically, but it creates these personal challenges for families, the people who support us. When you're away from home that often, then that also can be a difficult period. And I think that we weathered that storm and gained now the band room. But of course then there are other challenges too as times change. The band starts to move forward. We know that when James Watson came, he was charged really with reshaping the band. And I think he did that in his own way. The first few months were incredibly rocky, and I think he said that himself. But I think if that hadn't have happened at that time, maybe the band wouldn't be in the place it is now. But it is difficult when you lose a lot of players and when you're constantly rebuilding. But I also think that beneath all of that, the one common factor of this band over the years I've been in is its determination to succeed. And I think in 1992 we lost an awful lot of players, but we went and won the British Open, which was pretty unconceivable, I think, at that time, that we were actually going to do that with the number of changes we had, something like 13, 14 players. And so we rebuilt. And yeah, so I think that when James came along, I think he's regarded as a real revolutionary, but in actual fact, his background was in bands, although he was, obviously an orchestral trumpet player. And we did actually play an awful lot of original band music under Jim. But he created one or two waves when we started playing big band and Broadway brass and stuff like that. I know that a lot of traditional supporters of the band didn't enjoy that. But I think that what he did opened us up to a whole new audience, as well as the traditional people. And I think once that settled down, people realised that in actual fact, his heart was here and he wanted to succeed. And, we did some fantastic things during that period, although, yes, it was pretty challenging. Same year, I think, 92, we went to Sierra Leone. Can you imagine taking a brass band to Sierra Leone? But that was just something came along. And, we went for the British Council. And it was absolutely crazy. And they had their first and only ever national championships, brass band championships in Sierra Leone. And we went and we had an appeal for instruments and music stands and music. And, that got a lot of publicity. But that was one of the toughest things I've ever done. Not only just purely the heat and the conditions, but just seeing how people lived and, trying to play in those circumstances was pretty tough. And of course, at the same time, the civil unrest was going on, and we played for the then president, a guy called President Momo, and it was in investiture, and we were playing at the side of this so-called palace, and we were some government people, and they tipped us the wink that they said, as soon as you finish playing, just carry what you can, you leave everything else and you follow us. And we sneaked out the back of this through the gardens, through the kitchens. And at that time, in Freetown, the capital, there was no airport. Well, there was an airport, but it was unusable. And so you had to go by hovercraft to a little island. And we came round there, and on the beach, all our suitcases were lined up on the beach. And we got there, we're still in full concert dress, onto this hovercraft. They took us over to this island, this Conakry, and we were the last plane out. There was a civil war started that night, which is still raging. So I think we were pretty lucky. So that was a pretty tough time. I think like any major brand, and that's what we're talking about, people look to Black Dyke. Of course, a lot of people might not always relish Black Dyke. They want to see, like anything else that's popular, they may not always want to see the band do well. But I think for the vast majority of people, and certainly internationally, the band is regarded as really the real standard of brass bands. And something I've really enjoyed is how we've actually managed to, at times, you want to be doing new things, you want to be breaking new ground. The way in which we approach things, the way in which you want to commission new music, the way in which you show the band. And I think that really is important. And I think that the way we conduct ourselves and the way in which we go out is something that we have to be very aware of. And I think the band is aware of that, because there are so many people who do look at the band as being that standard bearer. And I think that's one of the challenges that also comes with being with the band, that sometimes that people can be negative, they perceive things, and yet we have to, in many ways, not respond to that, and we have to go along our way. And I think it's like, as you say, any premier band, whether it's Rolls-Royce or something like that, that brand carries a unique significance, and the history of this band is unique. And there are many fabulous bands, not only in England now, but we see for European bands, Scandinavian bands who are doing fantastically well. But I think that's also due to the fact that the standard that British bands have given over the years, they have led the way, and Black Dyke is still regarded at the forefront of that. I think again there's a lot of worry about that. I mentioned James Watson, and I remember his first rehearsal in coming along and saying that our repertoire wasn't wide enough, and that if we carried on playing what we're doing, then our audience would be dead in 20 years. And I think that's something that we have to constantly think about. Maybe contesting is an issue, and that bands want to contest. It's again how we measure ourselves. But maybe we have to think about the pieces that are being selected, how we go forward, how do we introduce new composers to the medium and get them to continue writing for bands. We've had some fabulous pieces composed for us in our even relative short history. The last 100 years is all that we've had for original band music. And we look at the way things have moved forward the last 20 or 30 years. The composers like Phil Wilby and Philip Spark and so Edwin Gregson, writing fabulous pieces of music, and lots of others too. But as an audience, how far do we want to push those boundaries in terms of tonality and also maybe the makeup of the band? Do we continue with the same setup that we have of rigid instrumentation, numbers and so on? And equally, do we accept that our audiences want to go forward and listen to what we would call contemporary music? And that is, I think, the danger. I do think, though, that we have so many young, talented players coming through that bands will not have a shortage of players. I really think that, we look now at the young players coming through, the standard is phenomenally high, far higher than I can remember, when I started out. And so and we look at the youth bands and youth organisations that are going forward and the enthusiasm of those, then you think, yes, there's still a great future for bands. But it is difficult, I think, at times without a very strong organising body, people who can actually come together with some serious ideas as to where they want to take contests. And if we're not careful, I guess that could just fragment, and maybe, you know, the top few bands will go their own way. But I do think that the certainly in terms of playing and players, then this future is bright. I teach a lot of youngsters, and you want to enthuse them, and we have to remember that making music should be fun, and we have to enjoy what we do. But we also have to remember, like in anything else, whether it's sport, if you want to be the best footballer, the best golfer, we I guess if we're playing an instrument, we have possibly some innate talent that's already there. But by and large, it's down to the practice and giving yourself, you know, the time to develop. Don't think that I want to be here, I'm an absolute beginner, and in 2 weeks' time I'm going to be grade 8. It doesn't work like that. Just the same as you wouldn't expect to think, oh, you know, I'm going to run a marathon, and you know, I've never done any training, I'm going to run a marathon and it'll be fine. I don't think that, you know, a lot of youngsters, yes, we want to make it fun. We've got to do it. And you've also got to think, I can't imagine, like I said before, that when I was growing up in Stoke-on-Trent, that I could have visited the countries that I've done because I played a brass instrument, playing for kings and queens, presidents, you know, playing Carnegie Hall, Sydney Opera House, all of these things. I couldn't believe I was going to do that, but I did and have, purely and simply because I played a brass instrument. And so that would be, for me, the opportunity. If you have that opportunity, take it.